Here's the conundrum. A bookie has refused to pay me out and confiscated my slip. I've taken the matter to IBAS, the Independent Betting Adjudication Service, and they've found in the bookie's favour. In my opinion, completely ignoring all the evidence that I've given. But what happened? I was in a shop, I went to pick up my winnings, and they said that the slip was dead. I asked for the slip back and they refused to give it to me. I asked them to look into the matter, and they came back with a story that said I'd placed a bet on one of the terminals. I'd then returned to the counter, asked them to cancel that bet and place it on another selection. I've then returned to the bookie and said this just isn't possible and explained the reasons why, and they said they'd look into it again for me. And then they came back with a different story, and this time it was really quite straightforward. The person who placed the bet had collected the winnings. They wouldn't say who that was, they wouldn't say if it was me or somebody else, and that was a problem I had because as I'd placed the bet, I knew I hadn't picked up the winnings. On I went to IBAS, only after trying to clarify with the bookie exactly what had happened. They've given me the option that I could report it to the police if I didn't like it. And then when I called up to try and establish exactly what had happened, I was told that I'd called up multiple times and the conversation was going to be terminated. Goodbye. So that was the end as far as they were concerned. I even also then sent an email saying, can you just clarify for me? And heard nothing back. So when I went to IBAS, and unfortunately I don't think IBAS have really got on top of this, they've summarised the situation and saying that I was complaining that somebody had already been paid out, and so they kind of missed the point and the point that I was struggling with. But they've carried on their investigation, and it turns out that the bookie has a rock solid case because the person who placed that bet collected the winnings, and they say they have CCTV to demonstrate this. What's interesting, story one, there was no CCTV because it wasn't available, yet in story two they managed to view that CCTV, but of course it's now been deleted. The bookie's story doesn't seem that consistent, whereas mine is, but they have statements from the shop staff and area manager that confirm that a regular customer came back to the shop and said he'd lost the slip, they viewed the CCTV and they paid him out. Whereas me, the person who held onto the slip when I went to the shop, they say I wasn't the person who placed that bet. The IBAS panel, therefore, had no difficulty in taking the bookmaker's side and confirmed that the person who placed the bet collected the winnings and it wasn't me. So on I went to appeal, but it would appear that appeals don't get very far with IBAS nowadays. As I told them of my intention, I sent in my appeal and my reasonings for it, heard nothing more, kept asking, have you actually received it? And I finally logged on to find out that the case had been closed. Now, not only is the bookie's story not consistent, but I happened to be in that shop for about half an hour, and I was placing other bets around the one that is being disputed. So I have other bets that were placed on the same tournament, so the same event, for the same stakes. And of course there's a question of how I actually had the slip in my possession at all. But also the bet in question, prior to that I placed another bet with a different bookie on exactly the same outcome. Plenty of issues here, not least how we ever got to this point. But I would say to the bookie, perhaps you want to take a little look at your in-house security to see exactly what happened. To IBAS, I'd hope that you'd take the customer complaints a bit more seriously. It always seems to me that the customer arguments don't seem to carry quite as much weight as the bookie's ones do. But it also got me thinking, how often does something like this happen? So to anybody who's experienced something similar, please leave me a comment so we can just get an idea of how widespread something like this might be. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and the next video will be where I've worked out the odds of this thing happening when the bookie said it didn't.